of attention in the Menendez Brothers case due to the coming out of the Netflix show Monsters, a show that interprets the brothers, Eric and Lyle, who murdered their parents, Kitty and Jose. After the popularity of the show, fans were split on how the trial should have ended up. Just like in the 1990s, how society was. Some people agreed with prosecution, saying the brothers' motivation was through an act of violence and through greed and had malicious intent. Then there are the people who agreed with the defense, that the brothers were doing it out of self-defense or fear. The verdict of the trial in the 1990s was that Eric and Lyle were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, serving with no parole until recently when new evidence came to light, and now the Menendez brothers have a right to a sentence negotiation. Based on the evidence and testimonies of this case, and also the personalities of Jose and Kitty Menendez, Lyle and Eric should have gotten manslaughter, and were not validated in a way that they were grieving or by the things that were afflicted to them by their parents. The boys were abused, neglected, and over-controlled by their parents and could not see a way out. Not only that, but Jose Menendez was sexually assaulting the boys at a very young age and made them fear for their lives. The Menendez family was living the American dream. Jose Menendez, a Cuban immigrant who was sent to the U.S. by his family, met the love of his life, Mary Louise, or Kitty, at Southern Illinois University. Jose and Kitty got married at a very young age in July of 1963, despite family hesitations. Jose was only 19, and Kitty wasn't much older. After that, Jose finished school and started his career, where he rose in ranks at different companies, eventually finding his success. Then they had their first child, whom they named Lyle, in 1968, and then have their second, Eric, in 1970. They lived in Hollywood, where Kitty was a housewife and devoted mother. From the outside, their life seemed perfect, but that was just the outside. The night of August 20th, 1989, Jose and Kitty were murdered by their sons, Lyle and Eric. Jose was shot 6 times, with 1 fatal shot to the back of the head. Kitty was shot almost 10 times, also including a fatal shot to her face. From the background section of an appeal that was released to the public by the U.S. courts, says that Lyle and Eric bought shotguns from a store in San Diego under false identification, after going to 2 other places and not being successful. Jose and Kitty were in the den, unarmed, watching television and eating together. Lyle and Eric busted through the doors and fired 15 shots at their parents. But before the killing was over, they went out to the car and Lyle reloaded his gun, went back in to the house, and shot 1 more shot to Kitty's face, who was still alive. Jose and Kitty died at the scene from the gunshot wounds. Jose had gunshot wounds inflicted to his legs after he died, and they covered up the scene by picking up the gun shells and leaving the house, discarding bloody clothes and shells at the gas station. They came back around midnight and called 911.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man,
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
Not long after the cops showed up, Lyle and Eric ran towards the officers screaming. They were caught because Lyle and Eric confessed to their therapist, L. Jerome Oziel, very soon after the murders took place. But it wasn't until 5 months later until they were arrested, when Dr. Oziel's mistress went to the police. The police searched Dr. Oziel's home and found the recordings with the confession. So why should Lyle and Eric get manslaughter? This first point is the abuse. Jose and Kitty were very high society people, and they expected a lot from their children. Jose wanted the boys to be the best, even if that meant forcing them. He wanted to control everything about the boys' lives, who they dated, what sports they played, even what college they went to. Lyle describes times in his very early age where his father would do things, abusive things, to help train him for whatever organized sport he was into, whether that was swimming, soccer, or tennis.
Him holding me under the water, how long I could take it.
What do you mean, how long you could take it?
We would go under, and I would fight him to get air, and then he would give me air. And we would keep doing that, and I would be able to do it less and less time. And it was very rough. And
Jose wanted Lyle to be the best at any sport he played, but he kind of ignored Eric for a large portion of his childhood until he started showing potential in tennis. That is when Jose started helping him train, so to speak. He'd go to tournaments, get him the best coaches, anything money could buy. Eric says this while being questioned in the trials. Getting back to your tennis, when you would be practicing, would your father be there participating in your practices? In tennis? Yes. Not every time, but most of the time my dad was there. Anytime he could be there, he would be there. And when you were playing in tournaments, was your father there? Oh, yes. Or he would fly in. And a lot of the times I remember I would start a couple of points and then I'd see my dad show up in a business suit, just having arrived. When the boys were excelling in sports, it took all of Jose's free time. He would expect calls from the boys if they were staying late to practice right when he got home from work. And he would also have them call him right after games and tournaments that he missed to hear a play-by-play of what just happened. This affected Kitty very negatively. She blamed Lyle for ending her career as an actress. Lyle talks about these incidents in the trials. She would say many things. She would say I ruined her life. And she would explain to me why and how I ruined her life. He would talk about times that she would speak normally to him, telling him that because she was pregnant, Jose gave her an ultimatum, that she would quit working, quit her career, and become a mother, or he would leave her. He also talked about these tantrums she would throw. She would be throwing things, screaming, and flailing, and wanting and trying to hate you. She cursed a lot. That until your dad gets home. I'll tell him the things you didn't do today. I wish you were never born. Why can't you be more like your brother? What's the matter with you? Then I would try to say something and she would say, shut up, I don't want to hear it, you're stupid, I hate you. Kitty also has been struggling with substance abuse, basically their whole childhood, growing up, kind of early adult life too, because her marriage was kind of falling apart because Jose wasn't having enough time to hang out with her. And he also had a lot of mistresses. He cheated on Kitty a lot. That made everything worse for the boys. In the trials, these points almost seemed to be glossed over at the time because in the 90s, abuse wasn't taken as seriously as it's taken now, which is terrible in the case of Eric and Lyle because they suffered so much abuse from Jose and Kitty. When it comes to these trials, they talk about it vividly of him threatening their lives and threatening money over their heads a lot. And as you see in the clips that I put in, it's very hard to watch just them talking about it. Imagine going through it. Which makes the second point way worse. And basically the reason why they killed their parents. And it was out of fear for their lives. Jose was sexually assaulting both of the boys at one time or another. Not at the same time. It started with Lyle, and it only lasted a year or two when he was about 7 years old.
He raped me.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Did you bleed?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Very.
So he came up to his father and asked him to stop. He told him it hurt and that he didn't want to do it anymore. And Jose said, I love you and I don't want to do anything that you don't like or that hurts you. I will stop. And so he did. And he sexually assaulted Eric up to days before murders happened. And in the trials, Eric shares some really explicit details on what Jose did to him. And he wasn't able to keep his composure while saying that, but Jose wanted to control his sons in the most intimate ways with his sexual abuse. And according to Bravehearts.org, children who have been sexually abused can see effects of disheartened behavior and eventually lead up to violent behavior. It's also associated with very many negative impacts like suicide, idolization, self-harm, anxiety, depression. There's also more evidence of this actually happening that came up more recently into light and is the reason why Lyle and Eric are getting their sentence renegotiated. It's a letter from Eric to his cousin, and Eric talks about avoiding and fearing his father. He tells his cousin if Jose knew that he was telling her something bad would happen to Eric. And this letter also exposes in the paragraph above him talking about fearing his father. It talks about how he can't tell his mother because she's so devoted to Jose that she wouldn't keep anything from him, even if that means protecting her own sons. And this was basically the main reason why Lyle and Eric eventually decided that they were going to kill their parents, was because one day after a big fight between them, an upset Lyle and Eric went back to the pool house, and Eric told Lyle that Jose has been molesting him for years. And that is when they decided that Jose was not gonna hurt them anymore. He was gonna protect them. So Lyle went up to ask his father to stop. That was the solution he came up with when he was a kid. He thought that that could make everything stop. So he went up to his father and he asked him to stop, and that he needed to stop doing whatever he was doing with Eric. And he said, "That's my son. I can do whatever I want with my son. You can't tell me what to do with my son." So that is when they decided they couldn't live without their parents being dead, basically. So the prosecution of this case says that Lyle and Eric killed their parents out of malicious intent. They said that they wanted money and that Jose threatened to take them out of the inheritance after an incident where the boys got caught stealing from some neighbors. Jose had everything planned for these boys. He had a plan to build a compound and wanted to build houses for both Lyle and Eric and the families they would eventually have. Robert Rand, who is an author of a famous book about the Menendez family, the Menendez murders, the shocking untold story of the Menendez family and the killings that stunned the nation. And he was talking to GQ about Jose's 5-year plan, where he wanted to move his whole family to Miami and build his compound there. There's also other reasonings that they say they acted weird right after the murders, going on spending sprees, demanding for an inheritance, part of their inheritance at least, and they thought this could really support their reasoning. But we have to remember that Lyle and Eric never had trouble with money. They could have anything money could buy. And according to winstonwish.org, they say grief affects everyone in different ways. Like, there's no set rules to grief, and people have shopping addictions or use shopping as a way to cope with their feelings, to forget about their feelings. So we can't really put going on a spending spree and spending the money and it's to not think about the fact that you killed your parents. I feel like we could put that more in a grief category, especially with the psychology of those boys. So a very big point in the prosecution for this was saying that Eric was gay, and so he couldn't be sexually assaulted by his father because he liked it. They made that one of their main reasons, which this is not valid information. Eric never came out as gay. He never admitted to anyone that he was gay. It was really just a reason to put homophobia into the courtroom, and so that the trial could go more their way, and it seemed to work a little bit. So Eric and Lyle are just two boys who were scared of their parents and what they were going to do to them. They feared that Kitty would have another one of her tantrums and hurt one of them. They feared that Jose was going to snap and go after their lives, or because they would start saying no, that he would want to hurt them in some way, because he knew he was slowly losing control of them. Because when kids grow up, you lose the control of parenting, and that's a thing. You could say it was money. You could say it was for greed. You could say it was malicious intent. But the evidence presented shows that something was happening behind those doors that was not good for those boys, by their behaviors, confessions, testimonies. And nowadays we take abuse way more seriously. And with this new evidence that's come up with the trial as well, the trial should have came out differently. And I'm glad they're able to have a negotiation on their sentence now, and they're able to have parole now, because Lyle and Eric killed their parents out of fear, and they deserved manslaughter.